Putin just seized $3 billion in commercial shipping and the world is looking for a response that isn't coming. This wasn't a random act of piracy or a desperate gamble by a cornered dictator. This was a surgical strike against the very foundation of American credibility, and the fallout is exposing a truth that most in Washington are too terrified to admit. For years, we were told that strength was defined by unpredictability and that intimidation was a substitute for a coherent global strategy. Now, as those ships sit detained in Russian ports, we are seeing the fatal flaw in that logic play out in real time. The era of unilateral dominance is being stress-tested by an adversary who isn't interested in a fair fight. Putin didn't need to launch a single missile to bring the West to its knees in this maritime standoff. He simply took the playbook that Donald Trump used to redefine American power and turned it right back against us. It is a moment of profound political collapse where the leverage we once celebrated has evaporated into thin air. We are watching the ghost of a failed theory return to haunt the very nation that created it. To understand why this $3 billion seizure is a knife to the throat of global trade, you have to look past the headlines about ice and geography. This is about the collapse of enforcement and the death of the rules-based order that America built after the Second World War. For decades, the world operated on the expectation that rules, once established, would be applied consistently and fairly. That expectation was the engine of American prosperity and the shield that protected our interests across the globe. But that shield has been cracked by a decade of treating international law as an optional convenience rather than a binding commitment. When we started treating sanctions, tariffs, and asset seizures as personal trophies to be announced at political rallies, we taught the world a dangerous lesson. We signaled to every strongman and rogue state that power is the only law that matters and that legitimacy is for the weak. Putin didn't discover a new tactic last week. He simply mastered the one we spent years normalizing. He is now operating in the blurred space between policing and warfare that we created for our own political convenience. The reflection in the mirror is devastating because it shows an America that has lost its moral and strategic compass. If you believe that America deserves a foreign policy built on actual strategy rather than just loud rhetoric, you need to stay tuned. We are diving deep into how this crisis started and what it means for the future of our economy. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below with your thoughts on whether we have become too predictable in our unpredictability. Your engagement helps us keep bringing you the unfiltered truth that the mainstream media refuses to cover. We need a strong community to demand a stronger America, so join the conversation right now. The precision of these seizures is what should keep every policymaker in Washington awake at night. These ships weren't taken by force in a chaotic skirmish. They were intercepted and detained under legal justifications that sound disturbingly familiar. Putin is using the same language of safety, compliance, and investigative status that we have used for years to justify our own extraterritorial enforcement. He is daring us to explain why his actions are illegitimate while ours are celebrated as a projection of strength. This is the trap that has left our leadership paralyzed and unable to respond with anything but empty threats. This paralysis is the true definition of a political collapse because it reveals that we have nothing left to escalate with. When you strip away the guardrails of international norms, you can't be surprised when your opponents start driving on the wrong side of the road. We dismantled the system of mutual restraint and replaced it with a vacuum of uncertainty. Now, that uncertainty is being weaponized against our shipping routes, our insurance markets, and our national security. The human cost is real, with crews held in legal limbo while the global markets recalculate the price of American weakness. This isn't just an international crisis, it is a psychological blow to the American identity that relies on the appearance of absolute control. We have been sold a myth that we can bend any system to our will through sheer intimidation without ever facing reciprocal pressure. That myth died the moment those ships were escorted into Russian ports without a shot being fired. Our supporters and allies are now forced to reconcile the fantasy of dominance with the reality of significant constraint. It is a bitter pill to swallow for a nation that has forgotten that true strength requires discipline and foresight. The markets understand what the politicians are trying to ignore. When enforcement becomes reciprocal rather than hierarchical, The cost of doing business skydives into the abyss. Capital flees uncertainty faster than it flees actual conflict, and we are seeing a massive flight of confidence right now. Insurers are rerouting routes and spiking premiums because they no longer believe in the protection of the American flag. This is the consequence of a worldview that assumed asymmetry would always favor the loudest actor in the room. Putin has effectively demonstrated that asymmetry is a two-way street that leads to our own doorstep. The lesson being learned by every strategic adversary from Beijing to Tehran is that the tools of Western power can be repurposed with enough legal creativity and patience. We are entering a stage where the first $3 billion is just a proof of concept for a new era of global confrontation. If you want to see more analysis on how we can turn this around and rebuild American credibility, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment. We are watching the world change in real time, and you cannot afford to be left behind in the old way of thinking. Join us as we demand a return to a leadership that actually understands the world as it is. America's survival as a superpower depends on our ability to respond in a way that restores coherence rather than accelerating our own decay. We cannot simply scream louder or make angrier speeches to solve a crisis rooted in a lack of institutional integrity. We have to rebuild our credibility not through the volume of our rhetoric but through the consistency of our actions. Power exercised without restraint does not intimidate forever. Eventually, it becomes a textbook for our enemies to study and replicate. Putin learned the lesson we taught him, and now he is the one doing the teaching. The era of unilateral enforcement without reciprocal exposure is officially over, and the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can start winning again. We must move past the era of performance and return to a strategy built on predictability and genuine alliances. The ships sitting idle and the contracts in limbo are not just collateral damage, they are the price of a failed political experiment. We have a choice to make. We can continue to collapse under the weight of our own contradictions, or we can rediscover the discipline that made us the leader of the free world in the first place. The American maritime industry isn't just a sector of our economy, it is the lifeblood of our national sovereignty. When foreign adversaries feel emboldened to snatch $3 billion in assets off the high seas, they aren't just stealing cargo, they are testing the thickness of our skin. We must realize that every hour those ships remain in Russian custody, the price of American leadership goes up. The defense of our commercial interests requires more than just military hardware. It requires a restoration of the legal and moral authority that once made an American-flagged vessel untouchable. We have to stop playing a game of checkers while the rest of the world has moved on to high-stakes geopolitical chess. To protect the American worker and the American consumer, we need a strategy that prioritizes stability over spectacle. Our economy is built on the free flow of goods, and that flow depends on a global maritime order that we historically guaranteed. When that guarantee is called into question, every household in this country feels the impact through rising costs and broken supply chains. We cannot afford to let our strategic competitors define the rules of engagement in international waters. Protecting America means protecting the sanctity of the routes that bring food to our tables and fuel to our engines. It is time to treat maritime security as the existential priority that it truly is. If you are tired of seeing American interests being treated as a footnote in global affairs, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We are building a community of patriots who want to see this country lead with strength and intelligence once again. Comment below with the word strategy if you believe it's time for Washington to stop reacting and start leading. Your support is what allows us to keep digging into the stories that the corporate media ignores because they don't fit the approved narrative. We are the voice of the silent majority who still believes in an exceptional and secure America. We have to look at the strategic shift happening right before our eyes. For decades, the United States held a monopoly on the tools of economic coercion. We were the ones who dictated who could trade, who could use the banking system, and whose assets could be frozen. But that monopoly has been shattered. Other nations have watched us use these tools and they have spent years building their own versions. They have learned how to use our own legal frameworks to justify their aggression, creating a world where the hunter has now become the hunted. This is the new reality of a multipolar world where legal creativity is just as dangerous as a carrier strike group. The failure to build replacement norms after dismantling the old ones is perhaps the greatest strategic blunder of the 21st century. You cannot tear down the guardrails of the international system and expect to be the only one who doesn't crash. When we normalized the idea that rules are just suggestions for the powerful, we invited every other ambitious power to follow our lead. Now, we are hitting the wall that we helped build. Putin's seizure of those ships is the proof of concept that our own tactics can be repurposed to paralyze us. It is a sobering reminder that in the realm of global power, what goes around almost always comes around with interest. The human element of this crisis is often lost in the talk of billions of dollars and strategic leverage, but we must never forget the sailors and crews who are being used as pawns. These individuals are being detained under the guise of investigative status, a term that we helped popularize in our own enforcement actions. It is a haunting irony that American-aligned crews are now sitting in Russian ports because of a legal loophole that we helped widen. Protecting American interests means protecting the people who operate the machinery of our global influence. We owe it to them to have a policy that doesn't leave them vulnerable to the whims of a strategic adversary. Our rivals are not just watching our military response, they are analyzing our domestic cohesion. They see a country divided by rhetoric and a political class more interested in winning the next news cycle than securing the next decade. This internal fracture is the greatest vulnerability we face. When we cannot agree on a basic set of facts or a coherent national interest, we become easy prey for those who operate with long-term patience and strategic clarity. Putin isn't acting out of confidence. He is acting out of an understanding that our system is currently too brittle to respond effectively to ambiguity. This is the moment where we must decide if we are going to double down on a failed model of performance-based leadership or return to the discipline of statesmanship. The world is watching to see if we have the humility to learn from our miscalculations and the strength to rebuild what has been broken. We don't need more loud threats. We need a renewed commitment to the institutions and alliances that multiply our power rather than drain it. True dominance isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the one who built the room and knows exactly how to keep it standing. Before we get into the final analysis of what this means for the future of the West, I want to remind you to subscribe and share this video. The more people who understand the real mechanics of power, the harder it is for the politicians to lie to us. Leave a comment and let us know what you think the first step should be to restore American credibility on the high seas. We are reading every single one of your responses because this is a conversation that belongs to the American people, not just the bureaucrats in DC. Let's keep the pressure on and demand the leadership this country deserves. The first $3 billion is just the beginning if we don't change course. We are looking at a template that will be used again and again by any state with sufficient regional control and the patience to wait for our moments of distraction. The era where strength alone guaranteed obedience is a relic of the past. In the modern world, strength must be anchored in legitimacy and backed by a consistency that our adversaries can respect and our allies can rely on. If we continue to treat international norms as inconveniences, we will continue to find ourselves on the losing end of the very games we started. The path forward for the United States requires a cold, hard look at the reality of modern deterrence. We cannot rely on the ghost of 20th century dominance to solve 21st century crises. To secure our future, we must reinvest in a maritime strategy that combines overwhelming naval presence with an unshakable legal framework. We need to make it clear that while we respect the sovereignty of all nations, the interference with American commerce is a red line that carries a cost far exceeding any potential gain. This isn't about starting a war, it's about preventing one by removing the ambiguity that Putin and others are currently exploiting. We must also strengthen our domestic manufacturing and supply chain resilience to reduce our vulnerability to this kind of maritime extortion. Every time we outsource a critical industry, we hand a lever of control to our adversaries. True national security is built on the factory floors of the Midwest and the shipyards of our coasts. By bringing production back home, we strip away the ability of foreign powers to hold our economy hostage on the high seas. This is the ultimate form of protection, an America that is self-reliant, industrially powerful, and strategically independent. If you believe that a self-reliant America is a stronger America, then you are in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join our community of over 100,000 patriots who are demanding a return to common-sense foreign policy. We are the ones who will hold Washington accountable for every ship seized and every sailor detained. Hit that like button if you're ready to see America put its own interests first again. Your engagement is the fuel that keeps this channel running and ensures that the truth is never silenced by the elites. The West is currently facing the consequences of a lesson being absorbed by a strategic adversary who is patient and legally literate. Putin did not need to outgun us to make his point. He simply needed to outlearn the assumptions embedded in a flawed worldview. When a nation lacks restraint, its escalation starts to look like desperation rather than authority. We have maneuvered ourselves into a position where the old options no longer restore order. This is the true meaning of the collapse we are witnessing. It is the loss of relevance in a crisis that we helped create through our own inconsistency. Russia understands it cannot win a traditional competition defined by Western financial dominance, so it is redefining the arena. They are moving the goalposts toward uncertainty, disruption, and cost imposition. This strategy only works if the opposing system is brittle enough to crack under pressure, and unfortunately, we have spent years making our system as brittle as possible. By prioritizing political performance over strategic predictability, we treated our allies as obstacles and our institutions as mere tools. In such an environment, a calibrated shock like the seizure of commercial shipping becomes devastating. The crews in detention and the ships idle in port are not just statistics, they are symbols of a new kind of confrontation where law, commerce, and force are inextricably linked. This is a world that requires patience, consistency, and a level of humility that has been absent from our leadership for far too long. The question is no longer whether we can respond, but whether we can respond in a way that restores coherence rather than accelerating our decay. Rebuilding our credibility will not be achieved through volume, but through the quiet discipline of a nation that knows its strength and doesn't feel the need to shout about it. As we bring this analysis to a close, we must recognize that the era of unilateral enforcement without reciprocal exposure is officially dead. Putin learned the lesson that power exercised without restraint eventually instructs the enemy on how to resist. Now, the rest of the world is watching to see if the United States is capable of learning from its own mistakes. We can either continue to chase the illusion of total dominance, or we can lead the world in building a system where rules actually mean something again. The future of American prosperity depends entirely on which path we choose to take. We have the resources, the talent, and the spirit to overcome this challenge, but we lack the strategic clarity. It is time to stop the infighting and focus on the external threats that seek to dismantle the American dream piece by piece. We are at a turning point in history, and the choices we make today will determine the world our children inherit. Let us choose a path of strength tempered by wisdom, and a policy of engagement backed by an unbreakable resolve. The ships may be detained today, but the spirit of American independence can never be held captive if we remain vigilant and united. Thank you for staying with us through this deep dive into one of the most critical issues of our time. This conversation is far from over, and we want you to be a part of it every step of the way. Make sure you've subscribed and turned on notifications so you never miss an update on this developing situation. Leave your final thoughts in the comments. Do you think the US will regain its footing, or is this the beginning of a long decline? We value your insight, and we will see you in the next video as we continue to track the collapse and the potential rebirth of American power.